Good evening. This is your channel, what we hope to become the global warming channel. We're intended on transferring as much information as possible to the general population of Honduras and the rest of Central America in the most easy to understand way. We have developed quite a success on matters of news analysis, and we have a huge ratings in Honduras, considering that this is a country, least developed country, that has among the lowest levels of development, among the lowest GDP per capita in the whole American continent. Only Haiti and Nicaragua are worse off than Honduras. Nevertheless, we have succeeded, we have been very successful in transmitting, in explaining complicated subjects in economics, international relations, environmental science, and other subjects of daily occurrence to the general population, to the point of we appear in ratings as being more viewed than even normal entertaining programs such as Hollywood movies, sitcoms, sports, music, and which is highly unusual. For example, right now in the U.S., the most successful news program is the O'Reilly Factor in Fox News, and Bill O'Reilly has 7 million viewers, but it cannot match, it beats all other news programs, but it cannot compare to entertainment programs. For example, sitcoms like 2.5 Men with Charlie Sheen. This one has 15 million viewers, and American Idol has 25 million viewers on a daily basis. So it's comparing like carrots with apples, carrots being the news program, which is less attractive for the general population. But we in Honduras have higher ratings than even American movies, than even American sitcoms. So the idea we're trying to do is develop a TV channel that focuses on global warming, and more particularly on deforestation, because Honduras has suffered, and we aim to cover all of Central America, because this is a region of tropical forests, and tropical forests are incredibly important for the absorption of carbon dioxide in the general war that is taking place right now between the emission of greenhouse gases and the suppression, or at least the absorption, of these greenhouse gases. And tropical forests have a higher capacity to do that than forests in template zones. Besides, these forests are also extremely useful on matters of they got a biodiversity, an amount of plants and animal species that is exponentially larger than all other regions of the world. The tropical forests like those in Central America and in other regions such as South America, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia, they account for just 6% of the world surface, but account for more than 50% of overall known species of plants and animals. So 50% of all pharmaceutical products are derived, are an extension to the biochemical formula that nature has provided in the form of plants and animals. And destroying this forest is a potential destruction of a future vaccine or a cure against cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, nephritis, arthritis, diabetes, and so many other diseases that are not curable or not fully curable with the present technology. So our goal is fundamentally to transfer this information to the general population. And this is a challenge because in Honduras, 15% of the population doesn't know how to read and write. In the rest of Central America is a little bit less problematic. The level of illiteracy is not as bad, but it's still high, and the level of the percentage that finishes high school is still less than half. So it's just like here, only like 3-4% of the population 25 or older who finishes university. So the capacity to comprehend complicated subjects like the link between preserving forest and not getting washed away in a huge flood or a mega hurricane is an idea that most of the population don't comprehend it. Politicians don't comprehend it, and if they do, they don't pay attention. Policy making never goes in this direction. So our goal is to change policy, and we are very effective. I came back, I studied basically in Europe, in Switzerland. I've got 7 university degrees, and 3 of them are from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. One of them is from the University, from the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, Germany. And when I came here 3 years ago, I started doing journalism, and I rapidly attracted a very huge amount of viewers, precisely because we can present ideas in a more coherent, consistent, logical way, more scientifically based. Everybody, the owners of all television channels, told me that the educational level of Honduras was too low and they would never understand. But we managed to make it very didactical, very easy to understand. So let us first position ourselves in overall world measurements to see where we are located exactly. This is a small country, small region of the world, and I was once in Singapore, and the customs official wouldn't know where Honduras is located. So I want to show you pictures about where is Honduras located. And here we are. This is in red in the American continent to the left of the screen. You see the small strip of land. That's Central America. It's 7 nations. Our goal is to cover 6 of those nations because in 6 of those nations, Spanish is the only language spoken. In the other one, an ex-British colony, Belize, there they speak English. That's the fundamental language. But it's anyway very, very small. It's just 300,000 people, 321 to be exact, in Belize. And then there's approximately 40 million people in between Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And these countries have incredibly useful tropical forests from the perspective of absorbing carbon dioxide and from the perspective of so you see here in the American and from the perspective of the potential pharmacy of the world for so many diseases that even if somebody is a multi-billionaire, he or she can still not get cured because the technology is not yet created. So here we see again the Central American region in exactly the middle. A lot of geographers put Mexico within Central America, but we're more into the idea that it's just a small strip of land of those 7 small Central American countries we just mentioned. So here we are. These are the ones we're talking about. We see in the northwest of Guatemala, that's Belize. So we're not counting that one. And then the other ones. Our goal is to focus on these 6 nations, but more particularly Honduras, because Honduras is the one that has been more its forests have been more destroyed. The others, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, are pretty much at the same level. And these are the forests we aim to preserve, which originally in the year 1502, when Christopher Columbus first landed in the north of Honduras, every single square kilometer or square mile of the region was covered by dense vegetation, by dense forest. Right now, it's estimated that less than 50% is left. In countries like Honduras, it's worse even. That's an average for the whole Central American region. And these forests are incredibly prolific in everything from absorbing carbon dioxide all the way to having a huge diversity of plants and animals, which could provide the key to solving so many diseases that right now afflict everybody, including the richest. And these are our typical tropical forest of the Central American region of Honduras more particularly. And we see they're incredibly dense, they're incredibly beautiful, aesthetically speaking. The aesthetic is not so important as their usefulness for serving as a cushion for the global warming phenomenon, the climate change phenomenon, the excessive man-made emission of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and chlorofluorocarbons. So this is what we're trying to preserve, and we're just showing you the nice parts. Obviously, what's left of it, when we look at just these pictures, we have the impression it's still a pristine, a virgin territory, but it is not. It has been hugely destroyed by loggers, from small ones to big ones, and from small to big, from small peasants aiming to slash and burn, destroying the forest to make way for small cultivation, all the way to large plantations of all sorts of tropical fruits and vegetables that are grown in this region. So this is what we got, and we're very concerned with a rapid deterioration, because in these last decades there has been the velocity by which forests have been destroyed have increased, have accelerated at a breathtaking pace, and at the rate things are going, it's going to be real soon, perhaps a decade before all forests will be destroyed. So this is the thing. We've got this big debate all over the world about climate change. There are some who even deny it. Most of the opponents are not so much denying it, but arguing that it is too expensive. And this is the thing. We have figured out ways to debunk these arguments in a very consistent way. Who's the one who's mostly presenting these arguments about it is too expensive and it's going to destroy too many jobs? With the high levels of unemployment and underemployment in countries such as the US, Canada, especially Western Europe and Japan, which are the leaders in creating technology and in deploying it, and the most environmental friendly, the most the technology that is more effective in combating, in suppressing, in stopping the emission of greenhouse gases, are these countries, and these countries are hesitating enormously with respect to making a full commitment to technologies such as photovoltaic panels and windmills to generate electricity because of the cost. And it is this general idea that has been predating and frightening whole populations and usually making it almost impossible even for the political parties who express sympathy to fighting climate change. They can't, because even when they are in power, even when they have a majority in Congress or in Parliament, the fear that it's going to generate a considerable increase in unemployment is so large that the whole debate is practically stalled, is there lingering and not moving forward because of the fear. So we've developed very consistent arguments that debunk this thesis. And this is the thing, who's the one mostly presenting these ideas about the fear of an increase in unemployment and in underemployment? It's mostly the political parties of the right. And these parties have a strong weight when they emit an economic linked opinion. The populations of just about all countries take them very seriously because they have a better track record when it comes to rates of economic growth. The left tends to have slower rates of growth, and obviously when that happens, levels of unemployment and underemployment go up. And this is a phenomenon throughout the world. The left voters frequently don't trust them because they think they're too naive, they're too candid. They want to do good, but they have no sense of reality and do not focus on the bottom line, which is providing jobs and providing good jobs. And it's not that the right has done a great job, but it has, in these last decades, we've seen an increase in unemployment and in underemployment in just about all countries of North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. We've seen, and the right has been responsible for that increase too. However, there is a general idea that you cannot just defy a position of the right when it comes to economic matters because they have a better track record. So this is where the left or the center, who are more sympathetic to the argument of climate change and the policies that need to be undertaken to fight it, cannot manage to get the legislation or the money, the budgetary allocations to get it over. So this is the thing. How do we present a better argument? And we're convinced that we have, because we have debated with some of the best economists in Europe and the U.S., and they have not been able to downgrade, to debunk, to diminish our arguments. We are going to be doing a small. When we come back, we will explain you more in detail those things. So just hold on, and we will soon bring you a couple of statistics that will point our case very clearly. So we're back, and we want to explain this thing, which is very difficult because economics is a very complicated science. This science has been repeatedly called, accused, insulted with the term the dismal science, because this is one of the best kept secret of economists. No teacher in the different universities I've been ever told me that. I had to really scratch deep to find out that no economist, and that includes Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Keynes, all the Nobel Prize winners, have ever deciphered what are the variables that cause economic growth. And that is why nations, even those that have managed to escape, to overcome poverty, usually endure, sometimes for decades on a row, high levels of unemployment and underemployment. We know it's possible for nations to have on a sustained basis not just very high incomes, but also zero unemployment and underemployment. There are a few small nations which usually do not attract a lot of attention, but they have been extremely successful in sustaining over the long term, let's say 3-4 decades on a row, extremely, let's say, incomes, GDP per capita, which is like the level of wealth of each citizen of a nation in a specific year. And we find nations such as, like, for example, Liechtenstein or Luxembourg or Bermudas or Singapore, that the Qatar, that have been on a sustained basis, like over the last 3 or 4 decades, with levels of wealth on a per capita level, which are higher than those of the United States, with zero unemployment and zero underemployment. It's very much a paradise situation for the citizens of those countries. And this data, what it shows you is that it's possible. And it's not because they're small, because a good example are these Latin American, Central American nations. They're all small, and they're all doing from regularly bad, like Costa Rica or Panama, who are the least worse off, to terrible, like Nicaragua and Honduras. Some of them going through terrible civil wars in the 80s, for example, that killed as many as 200,000 people in, for example, in El Salvador. So we know it's not because they're small, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Bermuda, Singapore, these nations, that they're doing well. It's not because of that. You look at the west coast of Africa and you find a lot of teeny, even smaller nations than the Central American nations, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Togo. These are very, very small African nations, and they are a lot poorer than any Latin America, than any Central American nation. I mean, dirt poor. Let's say Honduras has a GDP per capita in the year 2010 of just $4,000, but nations, some of these nations have it, Liberia, Sierra Leone, have it as low as $300. I mean, $300. We're talking about Honduras being 13 times wealthier, and Honduras is dirt poor. So it's not, smallness does not correlate. There is no parallelism between, does not help. Being small in population or in geographic size does not help attain fast and sustained economic growth. Has nothing to do. If bigness would be a hindrance, then the USA would be a poor country, because it got like 10 million square kilometers and like 312 million people, at least by the year 2010. So, has nothing to do. And the thing is that no economists have figured out. The nations that attained development did it pretty much without having a clear idea how they got to there. So that's why this debate is not well defined. Is the fight, the fort, the policies, the budgetary allocations to combat, to fight global warming, climate change, is it something that will hinder fast growth, that will destroy jobs, that will generate unemployment? And this is usually a position of the right. And the right has a lot of credibility when it comes to economic matters, not because they know what causes economic growth, but because through history they have screwed up less than the left. So we want to show you a couple of statistics to show you why is it that this argument of the right has such a strong punch, and has been, as we see here, this Western Europe. And this has been like the most proactive region in the world over the last more or less 3 decades on green matters, on environmental matters, on pollution, on fighting pollution, and in on fighting climate change. And we see this is pretty much a reflection of, let's say, Germany, which is at the core of not just Western Europe, but Europe in general. And there has been a consistent deceleration of the rate of economic growth. This is the average annual GDP growth, gross domestic product, which is the rate of economic growth. So on an annual basis per decade, we see a systemic deceleration of the rate of economic growth. And obviously, and in the 50s and the 60s, there was overemployment in practically all of these nations, even nations that don't have such a good image when it comes to economic success, such as Greece, Portugal, Spain. They attain rates, sustained rates of economic growth in the 50s and the 60s of 7, even 8% annually. But as time has gone by, it has systemically slowed down to the point of very, very high rates of unemployment and underemployment. And there has been a systemic increase in budgetary allocations to fight pollution, to advocate green causes, particularly in the last 2 decades on matters of climate change. And so it would seem that the right has a very strong argument. The more the allocations from the budget and the overall expenditure of the total economy on environmental causes, the rate of economic growth has decelerated. We would like to show you other statistics of, in this case, Japan, and we see more or less the same phenomenon. The 50s, it was impressive rate of growth. In the 60s, it accelerated even more, but then it plunged in the 70s, and then it decelerated further, and then more in the 90s, and then in the first decade of the 21st century, it has been just catastrophic. And we've seen that, for example, Japan with Germany are on the world lead of, for example, solar energy, photovoltaic panels, the transformation of solar energy into electric energy. They're pretty much the best in the world. And they have invested huge amounts of money, especially government giving incentives to private sector companies so that it will reduce their cost of research and development. And we see this correlation, which is pretty worrying and strengthens the position of the right and the fear in the general population that increasing expenditures, increasing efforts, increasing policies that fight global warming, that combat climate change, are detrimental for the job market. So I want to show you also the case of the U.S., which is obviously the country that has been dragging its feet more when it comes to, for example, adhering to the Kyoto Protocol. And we'd like to show you another set of statistics here from the United States. And here we don't see as pronounced a deceleration in the rate of economic growth, in the rate of gross domestic product. But we do see a consistent deceleration. Well, there was a small improvement in the 90s, but then again it fell to the worst level since the 1930s. Only in the 1930s did the U.S. attain a much slower rate of economic growth. All these nations, developed countries, need a bare minimum of about 3% rate of growth on a sustained basis, that is, over a decade, so that unemployment and underemployment won't increase. And if they want to see a rapid decrease, they need something better like 4%, and more even better still. So we see this situation, and it would seem that this argument is very strong. But let's get back to the studio, and So this is the situation right now, and it doesn't look too well for the cause of combating climate change. That is the reason why these negotiations have been stalling, have been going on without success, even though the evidence, the statistical evidence, keeps every time growing on matters of hard evidence supporting the case that we got human-made global warming, human-made climate change, and we need to fight it. So we're gonna go to a small pause, and then we're gonna come back with how we debunk the whole argument, because it's not a consistent correlation. It breaks down when we see the case of the country we will show you when we come back. Okay, so don't go away, because we got great new information that we're sure nobody has ever presented in a consistent way, as we will do in a couple of minutes. So we're getting back. Well, we're back, and we are very concerned with this situation. As we said, this debate, we've been hearing it over and over again. In particularly the U.S., we've been following this debate in numerous TV channels. Some of them are completely accept fully the concept that the world is being threatened in a way that hasn't been threatened perhaps in the last 12,000 years since the last ice age. And it's us that last time it wasn't humans that caused the rapid change in temperature. This time the evidence keeps just growing, and there's every time fewer and fewer climatologists or scientists in other fields that question the validity of the assertion that there is human-made greenhouse gases that are altering, that are changing, that are significantly contributing to increase the temperature of the world. So this is the thing. How do we deal with this problem of the fear of the increase in unemployment? Because when it comes to jobs and protecting the environment, even if people think that, even if they've just gone through a terrible hurricane, like for example the one that Central America, and in particular Honduras and Nicaragua, suffered in 1998 with Hurricane Mitch, which just here in Honduras it killed like 12,000 people, and it left homeless like about 285,000 people. In Nicaragua, it had also a terrible it went on a killing spree of almost equal proportions. And we look at the statistics, and they keep getting stronger and stronger and more frequent. Droughts. Last year we had an inordinate and unusual record drought in Honduras, and then almost record rains. It's the forecasts of climatologists have been, it's almost like they would be seeing on a crystal ball. The thing is that between even a country that has just gone through a devastating flood or devastating hurricane or a devastating drought, still, when it comes to jobs and something that somehow seems distant, you know, yeah, maybe you get lucky. The next big hurricane, it might just hit Guatemala and it might not hit us, or it might just hit Mexico or whatever, you know. But jobs, you need a job every day. You need to pay the rent every day. So how do we square the circle, to put it in more philosophical terms? Well, the issue is this. From the beginning in 1992, when there was this meeting in Rio de Janeiro, and the first world effort to brainstorm the potential problems of climate change, there was this idea which went into further, has grown stronger every day, in a way that developing countries shouldn't have to pay for this, because the bulk of the greenhouse gases that are right now causing these problems were emitted by developed countries, North America, Western Europe, Japan, whatever, over the last 100, 150 years. So, and besides, there was also the idea of jobs, in the sense that this is very expensive and this will hinder the possibilities of so many of these nations, which are desperately trying to get not so much out of unemployment, but out of poverty that is even more painful than the unemployment that developed countries usually endure. So China has been very reluctant. In India now, China has become the biggest emitter, the biggest source of greenhouse gases since 2009. By objective measurement, China has become #1 in the world in generating carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide and ozone and chlorofluorocarbons and all these greenhouse gases. So the thing is that China has been reluctant, but at the same time, this is the beauty of the thing. China debunks the whole concept for developed countries and for developing countries that investing a lot in new technologies that emit zero or almost zero greenhouse gases, such as solar energy and wind energy. The idea that this is not compatible with fast economic growth, China had just debunked it, even though they're not officially endorsing that idea. They're still endorsing the idea that they will not sign any document like the Kyoto Protocol, that they will not sign any document that binds them to cut rapidly greenhouse gases, because this could destroy the more than 30 years of fast economic growth they've been attaining since 1979. So this is the thing. We look at the statistics, and we want to show you here the statistics from China for the last 60 years, the same ones, the gross domestic product, the rate of economic growth. And when we see these statistics, we've here we got the 1950s, 1950, 1959, 1960, 1969, and so on until 2000, 2009. And the average annual rate of growth, we see a rapid increase since the 80s, like we said, since 1979. The Communist Party decided that they were no longer going to follow a leftist ideology. They also decided they were not going to follow a rightist ideology. They were going to stick with the science. More or less, they were going to be as technocratic as possible. And it has paid off over the last 3 decades. So this is the thing. In the last 10 years, China, even though it has not signed international agreements to limit significantly the emission of greenhouse gases, it has significantly changed the generation of energy within its approximately 10 million square kilometer country. China last year overtook the U.S. in being the country that spends more in solar panels and windmills for the generation of electricity. And it spent almost double in dollar terms than the U.S. And somebody says, well, China has like more than 4 times the population of the U.S. Sure, but the U.S. has well, China is a nation with just like a 7,000 GDP per capita for the year 2010, while the U.S. has 47,000, which is a huge difference. It's like 6 to 8 times, 6 times more, something like that, 6 to 8 times more. on a per capita basis, Americans are a lot wealthier. So China is in a great, as a percentage of GDP, actually investing more on fighting, on really going for the technologies that are not a stopgap, like natural gas. And by the way, a report from the University of Boston just came out the other day saying that natural gas is not as good as we thought when it comes to greenhouse gases, that it is just as bad as oil, or maybe even as bad as coal. So really, we got to go all the way, and we got to go for solar energy and for windmills or some other that really goes to zero when it comes to the emission of greenhouse gases. So the thing is that China made an effort that was actually larger than a developed country, than any developed country. That was impressive because it's still a third world country. Look, I want to show you another set of, right there. This is GDP per capita. This is not the rate of growth. This is in the year 2010. These are statistics from the CIA fact book, which we found more accurate than those of the World Bank. And the thing is that look at this. Japan in last year had 34,000. On average, each Japanese had an income throughout the whole year of $34,000 US dollars, and Germany had 36, and the US had 47, considerably higher, and Honduras has 4,000. Well, China has just 7,000. In broad general terms, you can say a nation belongs to the third world when it has less than $10,000. GDP per capita, when it has a GDP per capita of less than 10,000. And when it's in between 10,000 and less than 20,000, it's a middle income country. And when it's got more than 20,000, it's a developed country or rich country. So you see, China is better off than Honduras, but not better off than Costa Rica or Panama, for example, which got 11 and 12,000 respectively of GDP per capita. So let's get back to the studio. So as you can see, there is a huge difference when it comes to levels of development. So this idea, which is so entrenched, and this is what we're saying right now, the level of consciousness, of perception, of knowledge about global warming, about climate change in Central America, in Honduras particularly, is practically zero. I mean, it's a non-issue. It's a non-starter. You go nowhere pretty much presenting a subject. That's why we have not been able to succeed in convincing any TV channel to create a program on this matter. And that's why we are lobbying the world to help us create a channel which will be obviously in Spanish, and will cover the Central American region to create consciousness among the population that there is an imperative need to radically change the greenhouse gas footprint, the emission of greenhouse gases. We're gonna go to a pause right now, and when we come back, we will tell you why is it that we are so convinced that we can succeed in persuading the population to change radically course on matters of avoiding deforestation, which is essential for maintaining the ecological balance, especially on climate change matters, on maintaining the temperature of the world more or less at the level that has been for the last 1,000 years. Why we're so convinced that we just need a lot more time, more space in TV in order to be successful on this matter in preserving the rainforest, the tropical forests of the Central American region. So we'll be back in a couple of seconds. Well, we're back, and Yeah, it's pretty hot here in Central America, and the thing is, it's getting hotter because because of climate change. We've been feeling it. I mean, it's something that, well, I was in Switzerland. I remember we had record heats. There was a summer that you just couldn't find any ventilator or air conditioner in the stores. Everybody had taken them by storm. That was the same year. I don't know exactly when it was. Maybe 2002, somewhere around that, 2003, where there was a huge amount of deaths, especially in France, because the heat was so excessive. So we're seeing these record temperatures and these huge variations in extremes, in huge rainfall, huge droughts. The thing is, why are we so convinced that we can persuade the population of Central America? Well, since I came back to Honduras in the beginning of 2008, I started working in journalism for the first time in my life, and I did a great amount of studies before that. I'm a scientist at heart, and I managed to present these ideas, all sorts of ideas about how to attain fast economic growth with a thorough protection of the environment in a more consistent way. I've obviously been making more emphasis on the strictly economic side because, as we said, this is pretty much a non-starter. Subjects of the environment, and you have to bombard the population with a lot more time in order to succeed. But the thing is that we've been making emphasis on economics, and we've been systemically making reference to two economies in the world as role models for Honduras. That is Singapore and Hong Kong. As you see right now, you can see on behind an image of a tropical forest. Well, frequently in many of my programs I've had an image of the financial district of Singapore or the financial district of Hong Kong, and which is a pretty impressive amount of sky high, very modern buildings. And I've been constantly showing how these nations that have absolutely no natural resource, not even agriculture, usually have to buy much of their water from neighboring countries, and still have managed to outperform on wealth, on per capita wealth, the US, and particularly Singapore. And Singapore has been even more successful on adopting, on enforcing and very strict environmental policies, which shows that you can attain the best of possible worlds. You can attain fast economic growth while attaining also a strong protection of the environment. So the thing is that Honduras is a nation that usually is always behind everybody else in just about everything. I mean, everything that is good. We got right now like about the highest homicide rate in the world. I mean, we got to like double as high in Iraq. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Mexico usually appears in the news constantly as this endless gun battle that just keeps getting worse between drug cartels and the Mexican government and the border with the U.S. That's nothing. That we've got like 4 times higher homicide rate than Mexico. So it's usually bad. But the funny thing is that the Honduran government recently did something very unusual, which was they copied, they practically took word by word that I have been repeating day after day, even though I got a very small amount of airspace, because I don't belong to any political party, because I don't adhere to any ideology of the left or the right. I stick to science and exclusively to science. I seek correlations and causality linkages, and not ideology of the left or the right, which have systemically failed Honduras, Central America, Latin America, and the rest of the world. So the thing is that I got very few friends among the owners of TV channels, which are always tightly linked to one of the two main political parties in the country, or off lately with tight links with the left, with Hugo Chavez from Venezuela. And that way I barely get any airspace. And the thing is that despite that, the Honduran Congress recently passed a law that was a very unusual thing. They created what they call charter cities, which is pieces of territory within the Honduran government that will have a different jurisdiction, that will be like a country within a country. These pieces of land will be handed out to foreigners from developed countries who have a better track record in attaining progress, attaining development, and not falling into the rampant corruption that is so typical of Honduras and so many other third world countries. So the idea is to mimic. The government repeatedly said, as it was trying to convince the population, that it was doing this in an effort to mimic the example of Hong Kong and Singapore, and more particularly Singapore. They made emphasis that the president of the country and like the most important people from Congress went all the way to Singapore to inspect the country before passing the law. Obviously, they were very impressed, and they passed the law. And the thing is that before I came here, they didn't even know where the hell was Singapore. You know, they never spoke of it. The only country that attracts all the attention on economic matters in Honduras is the USA, is the United States of America. 70% of Honduran exports go over there, and the huge amount of imports also come from over there. The bulk of foreign direct investment comes from the U.S. and so forth. I mean, so the thing is that now the Honduran government is even establishing diplomatic relations. It's creating an embassy in Singapore, even though it's very cash-strapped. It had severe budgetary problems right now. It's cutting it, but it's increasing that. And before I came here, so I've proven effective in shifting policy in a big way, big time, because my arguments are very consistent, they're very logical, and they transcend this ludicrous debate between the right and the left, which systemically is unable to deliver fast and sustained rates of economic growth. So we've been very successful on this matter. So that's why we're sure. And we want to show you some pictures right now of what's been going on in Honduras and the rest of Central America. The tropical forests have been massively destroyed. They just tear off regions that are declared national parks, and they're tearing them down because the law, there are like 4,000 laws in Honduras, and none of them gets respected. They don't have, the state don't have the capacity to enforce them, and even when they know that something is being done illegally, they're usually taking a kickback from the ones who are, for example, the loggers, in order to, and they get a kickback just about from everything that goes around wrongly in this country. And that's the way things have always been going on. However, the media has proven throughout the world successful in shifting policy in developed countries because the media has a bigger liberty than in developing countries. They are more effective in shifting policy in that direction. But here in Honduras, I have proven quite effective, and together with a group of young women and men who are very concerned with the environment. This is a picture of Guatemala, of the north of Guatemala, from satellite. And these are peasants who usually slash and burn. It's subsistence agriculture. It doesn't feed them, and it doesn't. So as you see, this is a map. We want to stay there on that map. This map shows the lighter the color, the lower the destruction of forests. So you see like Costa Rica and Panama, which are the most developed, are the ones that have least destroyed their forest. And Honduras, which is the second poorest in Central America, is the one that has destroyed most of its forests. And then the other ones who are also at a critical level, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, are the other economic worst off in the region. We see, let's come back to the studio. We see a correlation between levels of development levels of development and protection of the environment. They go hand in hand. But when we're going to talk about that later. Right now we've got to go and rest for a little while. So don't go away. We're coming. So we're back, and as we said, the core of our goal is to try to shift the mindset, the idiosyncrasy, the way of thinking of the Honduran and Central American population, and also policymakers. Policymakers, they all dislike me, from the two main parties in Honduras, as well as those from the right and the left. They all dislike me. But they do recognize that what I say is very consistent. I usually I usually bring people from all positions in Honduras and usually crush them in the debate. And because I focus things from a different perspective. We're focusing things from a strictly scientific perspective, and the whole thing takes a new debate. So we see a correlation. We're saying we see a correlation between levels of development and the protection of the environment. For example, the slash and burn destruction of forests by small peasants. That wouldn't occur if we get fast economic growth. Then we can shift the population voluntarily. We see in all nations of the world a rapid increase, a rapid flow, rural-urban flow of people. The faster rate of economic growth, the faster people go away from the rural areas to the cities. In the last 30 years, more than 200 million peasants in China have gone mostly to the coastal cities, which are the ones that have attained the fastest rates of economic growth, therefore created the largest amount of jobs and the highest paying jobs. So this is a phenomenon we saw over the last 200 years in Western Europe, in North America, Japan. And we know that nobody suffers because they abandon the fields, the rural areas. Nobody suffers. People live better in cities. And there's a higher means the destruction, the slash and burn destruction of forests no longer occurs because people no longer make a subsistence living from farming. Then the logging also, environmental protection agencies are always more effective in developed countries because we know that the higher level of development, the higher the salaries of public officials, and therefore the lower the chance of them getting bribed. So how do we get fast economic growth? Well, we're about to publish a book, hopefully in New York soon, where we demonstrate a correlation between over the last 3,000 years of human history all over the world. We scrutinize all countries in the world, and we find a correlation, a parallelism, a very tight parallelism between levels of intelligence of the rulers of a country and the rate of economic growth. So the higher the level of intelligence of the ruler of a country, the faster tended to be the rate of economic growth. It didn't always happen, but like in 75, 80% of the time, 4/5 of the time, it did happen. It happened in the 21st century, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, on a systemic basis. And for example, we want to show you we would like to show you, for example, the new generation of automobiles, that have just come out, completely electric automobiles like the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Miev, or the Think City, or the Tesla, the Roadster Tesla. We'd like to show you these photographs. Right, well, see, the Toyota Prius, which was the first hybrid, look at the huge difference in price. We lower the We go down and we show the other, here again, they're completely electric. And there's a huge gap. So even for people from rich countries, they will really hesitate a lot between buying. For example, the Leaf is based on the Versa, and also the Prius is based on the Yaris. It's practically the same structure car, but it's just the batteries which are so expensive, and it elevates the cost. So the faster the rate of economic growth, the higher go the incomes of a population, the sooner that population can buy fully electric cars. We show you also the Nissan Mief, the Mitsubishi Mief, I'm sorry, and we see also a big gap in price, 30,000 to 14,000. It's a no-brainer. I mean, for somebody who's not necessarily cash strapped, but still not a millionaire, not a surgeon, for example, not a heart surgeon or a hotshot lawyer, definitely go for the gasoline automobile. So we're short. Let's get back to the studio. We're short on time, and unfortunately we couldn't cover everything. But that's the goal: to systemically bombard. And we need your help. We need financing in order to get this channel set here in Honduras, and be able to cover not just all of Honduras, access all television sets in the country. Like 95% of the population of Honduras and the rest of Central America watch TV on a regular basis. So television is excessively effective for reaching a population more than radio or newspapers. And we need also to cover Central America. So we're asking for your help, financial help, to get started on this matter as soon as possible, because at the rate tropical forests are being destroyed in Central America, it's a matter of perhaps 10 years, because before they will all be gone. So we're counting on you. Bye. So it's just like here, only like 3-4% of the population 25 or older who finishes university. So the capacity to comprehend complicated subjects like the link between preserving forest and not getting washed away in a huge flood or a mega hurricane is an idea that most of the population don't comprehend it. Politicians don't comprehend it, and if they do, they don't pay attention. Policy making never goes in this direction. So our goal is to change policy, and we are very effective. I came back, I studied basically in Europe, in Switzerland. I've got 7 university degrees, and 3 of them are from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. One of them is from the University, from the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, Germany. And when I came here 3 years ago, I started doing journalism, and I rapidly attracted a very huge amount of viewers, precisely because we can present ideas in a more coherent, consistent, logical way, more scientifically based. Everybody, the owners of all television channels, told me that the educational level of Honduras was too low and they would never understand. But we managed to make it very didactical, very easy to understand. So let us first position ourselves in overall world measurements to see where we are located exactly. This is a small country, small region of the world, and I was once in Singapore, and the customs official wouldn't know where Honduras is located. So I want to show you pictures about where is Honduras located. And here we are. This is in red in the American continent. To the left of the screen, you see the small strip of land. That's Central America. It's 7 nations. Our goal is to cover 6 of those nations, because in 6 of those nations, Spanish is the only language spoken. In the other one, an ex-British colony, Belize, There they speak English. That's the fundamental language. But it's anyway very, very small. It's just 300,000 people, 321 to be exact, in Belize. And then there's approximately 40 million people in between Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And these countries have incredibly useful tropical forests from the perspective of absorbing carbon dioxide and from the perspective of so you see here in the American and from the perspective of the potential pharmacy of the world for so many diseases that even if somebody is a multi-billionaire, he or she can still not get cured because the technology is not yet created. So here we see again the Central American region in exactly the actor in Fox News, and Bill O'Reilly has 7 million viewers, but it cannot match, it beats all other news programs, but it cannot compare to entertainment programs, for example, sitcoms like 2.5 Men with Charlie Sheen. This one has 15 million viewers, and American Idol has 25 million viewers on a daily basis. So it's comparing like carrots with apples, carrots being the news program, which is less attractive for the general population. But we in Honduras have higher ratings than even American movies, than even American sitcoms. So the idea we're trying to do is develop a TV channel that focuses on global warming and more particularly on deforestation, because Honduras has suffered, and we aim to cover all of Central America because this is a region of tropical forests, and tropical forests are incredibly important for the absorption of carbon dioxide in the general war that is taking place right now between the emission of greenhouse gases and the suppression, or at least the absorption, of these greenhouse gases. And tropical forests have a higher capacity to do that than forests in template zones. Besides, these forests are also extremely useful on matters of they got a biodiversity, an amount of plants and animal species that is exponentially larger than all other regions of the world. The tropical forests like those in Central America and in other regions such as South America, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia, they account for just 6% of the world surface, but account for more than 50% of overall known species of plants and animals. So 50% of all pharmaceutical products are derived, are an extension to the biochemical formula that nature has provided in the form of plants and animals. And destroying this forest is a potential destruction of a future vaccine or a cure against cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, nephritis, arthritis, diabetes, and so many other diseases that are not curable or not fully curable with the present technology. So our goal is fundamentally to transfer this information to the general population, and this is a challenge because in Honduras 15% of the population doesn't know how to read and write. In the rest of Central America is a little bit less problematic. The level of illiteracy is not as bad, but it's still high, and the level of the percentage that finishes high school is still less than half. Good evening. This is your channel, well, what we hope to become the global warming channel. We're intended on transferring as much information as possible to the general population of Honduras and the rest of Central America in the most easy to understand way. We have developed quite a success on matters of news analysis, and we have a huge ratings in Honduras, considering that this is a country, least developed country, that has among the lowest levels of development, among the lowest GDP per capita in the whole American continent. Only Haiti and Nicaragua are worse off than Honduras. Nevertheless, we have succeeded, we have been very successful in transmitting and explaining complicated subjects in economics, international relations, environmental science, and other subjects of daily occurrence to the general population, to the point of we appear in ratings as being more viewed than even normal entertaining programs such as Hollywood movies, sitcoms, sports, music, and which is highly unusual. For example, right now in the U.S., the most successful news program is the O'Reilly